Travel Thursday. Come on, get into it. Travel Thursday.
Oh man, that jingle's just gotta go. Okay, so
No.
welcome back to Travel Support Thursday. This is number 2 of our series of Quit Your Job, Travel the World. Between the two of us, we have quit our jobs to travel the world 5 total times.
Once for me, 4 for him.
Yeah, and we're pretty good at it by now. It's a thing that we're
don't know.
pretty good at.
Is that a good thing to say? We're good at quitting our jobs.
I'm
to
also
travel
not
the
sure.
world?
I'm also not sure. But what we can do is we can help you out there do the same thing if that's a thing that you're into. Being able to like leave your job for a little while, whether it's sabbatical and go and see Europe for 3 months, or go on a big crazy 1-year trip around the world, or just free up enough time to be able to do whatever you want to do in your life that isn't work. And that's all that we're going to be talking about for the foreseeable future of this podcast channel.
And the hope is really just to share our experience in a way that feels transparent and attainable for anyone just trying to make a big shift in their lives, even if it isn't to go and travel the world, or even if it isn't to quit your job and burn your 9 to 5. And also it's a little bit because we need to use these microphones for our podcast. They're really
We
fun.
bought these fancy microphones. We got to use them.
And
Got to get our
a
money.
little bit so that I could sing the jingle.
Oh yeah, the jingle. So in last week's episode, we talked about the why. Why would someone quit their job to travel the world, which generally breaks up people into 2 camps of like, camp 1 is like, why wouldn't you? Of course you're going to do it. And that's probably you if you're listening to this thing. And camp number 2 is like, that sounds crazy and like it's going to be way too expensive. And also seems like it's going to like ruin your entire career and everything else. So why would you do that?
So we talked a little bit about like our personal motivations, what got us to the point of saying we have to do this. Got a little heavy last week. I don't know that it will this time, but today we're talking about the logistics. We're getting into the logistics, and I think when we first quit our jobs to travel the world, I think our first inclination was to ask, how much is this going to cost? Because we needed to save for that.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the very few questions that you have, and I think the question that we got asked the most from everyone else around us as soon as we like announced to our friends and family, like, "Hey, we're gonna go quit our jobs to travel there." They're like, "How much does that cost?"
Yeah.
And that's what we're gonna answer. And we're just gonna get right to it. A little over $40,000 for the two of us to be able to travel for a full year. I'm not a big fan of just like hanging out numbers and just like waiting till the end of the episode.
You're
to
not
give
a
you the
big
one
fan
thing.
of pausing at all. It's just like straight to it. 40,000.
It's like,
On our true story, on our 5th date, Josh gifted me a book about financial planning. What was the book? It was Ramit
Sethi's. Yes,
book.
yes.
I will teach you how to be rich.
I will teach you rich.
I mean, it was relative to what we were talking about.
She had talked about it, and it was not totally unprompted. I didn't just present you this random book. We had talked about it, and you were like, I'm worried. I don't know very much about finances, and it was the best finance book I could find. Okay,
it was a great book.
Okay.
So if you're new here, either on audio or on YouTube, thanks for joining us. We make travel YouTubes.
Yeah,
We
the
make
whole
travel
platform.
YouTube.
And we're so friggin' good at it, as you can tell.
We make travel YouTube videos, but specifically on a budget because we're very, very, very budget.
Yes, very thrifty. Absolutely very thrifty.
Love a good deal. And what kicked off this whole thing was we decided to quit our jobs to travel the world and take a honeymoon, a very long honeymoon, a 1-year honeymoon. That has since evolved into, ta-da, this, where we now travel the world on a budget and we now make a living off of it on YouTube.
Yeah.
Long story short, in 2021, we took our 1-year honeymoon, documented it all on YouTube. And when we came back, we summarized and broke down all the expenses for that 1-year trip in a YouTube video. You can find it in the link in the description.
Yeah, definitely link down in the description.
But yes, all of that is to say we spent, the exact number was $40,064.96.
Yes.
This was in 2021, so 2021 to 2022. So, mind inflation, because eggs and stuff has been rising like crazy. Am I right?
Yeah.
We didn't buy a lot of eggs on the trip.
No, almost none. So let me give you just like a real quick overview about what this trip was. So we started off the trip by flying to Rome in summer of 2021. And then we bought a 3-month long Eurail pass and just went to all the big cities in Europe that you can think of. We just tooled around on this Eurail pass, going everywhere, eating all the pizza, all the pasta, all the delicious breads, having the most amazing time in
We
Europe
walked the
during the
Camino de
summer.
Santiago.
Yes. And then right after that, we started our like Southeast Asia leg of the trip, which I think we kicked off in Singapore first. And then up to Thailand after that, traveled around there for a couple months between Thailand and Malaysia. And then eventually made our way down to Australia a couple months later. Drove a camper van, even though it was like flooding, to basically as far as we could for like 20 days across Australia, which was amazing.
We went to Bali, and then I think we ended in South Korea almost a year later.
Yeah, 351 days later, the end of our trip in South Korea. That was our last day before we like came home after that. And by came home, I mean like we arrived back and then immediately made plans to go and travel some more as quickly
Because
as
we
we
were
could.
living on other people's couches.
Yes, and we were totally out of money, so we needed to solve a couple other problems. And that trip in itself was amazing, and I would say totally unexpected for us at that point in time. Like, we had been saving up for it, but our plan to go on this trip we came up with, and we literally quit our jobs a month before COVID hit.
I mean, and that seems like eons ago. And honestly, I know it's a tough spot to think about. Like, COVID was just a rough time for everybody and their moms. And yeah, we're looking at our spreadsheet and our plans for when we intended to start the trip, or like before we knew what was going to happen in 2020. Right? We were planning to get married in 2020 and then start our trip in 2020. And then we didn't end up going until 2021. Anyway, a lot of our plans ended up changing because of the pandemic and where we could go and could not go. But that number, $40,000, is pretty representative of, like, I think what we were intending and what we were planning even before we knew about the pandemic.
Yeah, and I actually reran all those numbers in preparation for this podcast of what it costs today in 2025. And hold on, let me bring that up so you can tell I'm a bit of a numbers person. So starting today, like if you left on your 1-year round the world trip today and you did that exact same thing, 3 months across Europe, another like 3 to 5 months across Southeast Asia, and then another couple of months across Oceania up to South Korea and Japan, etc. And then all the way like even back, adding a little bit more on top of that, which was our original plan. Coming back, going to Vancouver, going to Machu Picchu, going to like Rio de Janeiro for a little while.
I'm like, I want to do this trip.
Yeah, no, basically a full year around the world trip to all the places that a lot of people go costs about $48,000 for 2 people. So that means $24,000 per person. That's the most recent numbers that I have after literally rerunning every single number for every single flight based on the day, every hotel, every hostel, every blah, 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 the whole thing.
And is this still taking into account the fact that we are cheapo?
Yes. So this is, yeah. And I think it's worth describing like the type of trip that we had.
Yes.
Because we weren't doing like the most budget thing. We could have saved a lot of money by staying in hostels, probably, and sleeping in bunk beds everywhere that we went, but that just wasn't the type of trip that we imagined for our honeymoon. That wasn't.
I mean, we definitely did stay in a lot of hostels, especially in Europe, where hotels and private rooms were just way more expensive. And I remember staying in a lot more hostels in Portugal, in Spain, along the Camino de Santiago, and where else? Yeah. But
Japan, South Korea, both were very expensive.
But that's true. That's a good point. We tend to, if you don't watch our channel, please do. But if you don't watch our channel, the way that we kind of approach traveling is we're there for the experiences. We love being in a place, like just getting to be in a country, in a new city is generally like good enough for us. It feels amazing enough. And then when we think about accommodations, we're usually on the budget side, but we do like to spend a little bit more to have a private room. And then for food, I think we tend to be way more cheap than most people.
Yeah. And I think if you like round out this number, right, this $40,000 or $47,000 as it is today, break it down per day. How much is that? I'm good at math. Hold on. It's like between 125 and $150 per day will get you a hotel and like 2 meals out a day and then 1 meal eaten inside of your hotel, like from a grocery store or something like that.
Hmm.
All the flights that you need to get from place to place, all the buses, all the trains, all the whatever, and
All
then
the
about
visas.
all the visas, yes, and then also like one major activity per day.
Hmm.
If that's like your thought process, that number is going to be pretty much dead on
Yeah.
for what you're trying to do today.
And I would say in general, like when I look back on that 1 year trip, and still to this day, we're generally not people that splurge on tours or activities as much. We'll try to do one every few days, in a new location, but we try to keep things generally pretty budget.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are ways also to cut this number down, but we're going to talk in depth about that in future episodes. There are
And
ways
there
to
are
cut.
definitely ways to splurge.
Yeah, for sure. Way more ways to splurge.
We probably
Um,
don't know them that well, though.
So when we first put this plan together was like 2019,
Yep.
something like that. How did you feel about the initial number that came out, and how did you feel about our chances of actually saving that amount of money up?
Well, if I'm remembering correctly, I actually think we predicted that we were going to spend
Yeah,
$35,000.
about $100 a day for
Yeah.
just under.
And
Yeah.
then, so like we were close, but $5,000 over. But I remember we were aggressively saving just in case. Um, the initial number felt very large
Yeah.
because, like,
We were at zero.
outside of, I mean, no, that is the most money I've ever spent on anything. Granted, it is over the span of a year,
Mhm.
but it is the largest number that I had seen for anything that we were going to pay for.
Yeah.
We, at this point in time, we didn't really own anything. The most expensive thing that I owned was I didn't even own my laptop. It was from work.
Yeah, we had like a $4,000 car that we needed, but
Yeah.
then ended up selling to go on this trip
We
faster.
rented
Mhm.
our apartment, which was pretty expensive, but we didn't own it.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was a big number.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, $40,000 is a year's salary.
For sure. For sure. And I think at that point in time, we were like both you and I were at $0 saved.
Yeah.
We had started at zero, which I think is a privileged position to be in these days for sure.
Yes, we
I
weren't
don't-
in debt.
We weren't in a mountain of debt. Neither of us had student loans.
We pay them off. Yeah.
Yes, but it is still possible to do this with student loans. In fact, I've gone on round the world trips with
Yeah.
people who were actively paying off student loans. There's ways to like restructure them to make that easier. And
Ramit set these books.
sure, that's a good place to start. Good place to start.
He actually was that book actually helped me make a plan to aggressively pay off my student loans.
Mhm.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I
So
digress.
I think for us, coming up with this goal, this plan, this number, just having that in our minds as something that we were working towards made it so much easier because
Yes.
without it, you're just kind of like saving
For something.
some amount for who knows how long.
Yeah.
But having this pretty clear idea, which we're going to go through in future episodes of like exactly how we got to this number, and we're going to like literally build a trip step by step, and price out everything. But having this number, this goal, this $40,000 or $47,000 that we've now told you is how much it costs for two people to go on like a pretty nice, stay in hotels most of the time, eat at restaurants a decent amount of time, fly basically anywhere you want, round the world trip, still on a budget. Having a goal seemed like it locked something into our minds where all of a sudden, like everything else that was happening in our lives just
Nothing mattered.
took a back seat to just make this number happen.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, the type of mindset that you need to have to really go on a trip.
Yeah, it almost felt like the quest to go on the trip took a backseat once we had this number, because then it became quest to reach this number.
Uh-huh.
Then we can take the quest to travel around the world.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's interesting because in the last few years of doing this, we've met so many kinds of travelers. We've met some travelers who've done this exact same thing. But I will also preface that we are the kind of people that generally like to have more planned than none.
Yeah.
We've met people who say they just did it. They just quit their jobs and left. They just they just quit their jobs, traveled the world until their money ran out, or they just quit their jobs, traveled the world, and worked until their money ran out, and
Yeah.
then like to kind of go with the flow. I would preface that we are just not that good at going with the flow in that regard.
True. And also our intention was to not work at all during that entire
Yes.
year, that to have
Yeah.
zero income for that entire year. And that might be also what you're hoping to do, but I think for a lot of people they're going to come up with some sort of plan
Yeah.
to still be making money or have some sort of income
Yeah.
as they're traveling.
Yeah, I think it's and I say this only with no judgment or no, like opinion one way or the other, but mostly just to say that we tend to be the kind of people that like to have that cushion.
Yes.
Like
I think we have
I
to have.
don't know that I would have been able to just quit my job and travel the world with no idea if we would have enough money.
Right.
Like to me, that's just not secure or safety. But like I wish I could be that breezy and brave, but I'm not.
Right. So let me give you some other numbers real quick.
Hmm.
3 months across Europe for 2 people. I just added this one up as well. And we're going to go into each of these in detail in future episodes, but I just want to give like an overview, a goal, a number, and then we'll show you how we got there later.
Josh loves the numbers.
So this is like flying to Paris, train to Brussels, off to Amsterdam, through Germany. Heck, why not just go to Oktoberfest? Copenhagen, Oslo, Stockholm, Santorini, Athens, fly to Switzerland, do the whole Italy thing, Rome, Venice, Florence, off to Portugal, up through Spain, Madrid and Barcelona, over to Bordeaux. I mean, why not do a little bit of wine tasting? Up to London, Dublin, and then fly back home. And this is a 3-month thing, which I think a lot of people dream of, this like 3-month backpacking across Europe. And that for 2 people is $12,200. So
Okay.
that means you and your partner, whoever you're going with, if you are going with somebody else, you each need to save up about $6,000 to be able to do a
Yeah.
backpacking trip across Europe together. And if you're doing it by yourself, it's about $9,000. So you do
So
save
it's
it.
not half, but
No,
it's the accommodation really.
it's the accommodations. Yeah, the 100% the accommodations.
And the flights.
So different one, 3 months across Asia, flying to Tokyo, go to Osaka, go to Kyoto, fly to Hong Kong, over to Taipei, why not? Hey, let's go hang out in Bali for like a week, and then do a little Singapore trip, and then might as well keep going up from Malaysia all the way up through Kuala Lumpur to Langkawi, Thailand, Siem Reap for a little while, take a train all the way across Vietnam for a bit, fly to Seoul to finish up the trip, and then back home. That experience costs about the same as 3 months in Europe. It's about $11,000.
What about Central and South America?
I have not added those up yet, but I'm going to. I
Okay.
don't know what do you think is the typical 3-month long tourist path in Central and South America? I don't
'Cause
know the
we
answer to
have
that question.
traveled through bits and not a ton, but we have traveled through Central and South America a little bit pre-YouTube.
Yeah.
And Mexico, but we've never done like a chunk of like 3 months there.
Yeah.
I
Sure.
bet that would be easy to figure out.
Yeah. We'll solve that in one of the future
Yeah.
ones. So there's all sorts of different like scopes of these trips, right? Like you don't have to go on this like gigantic granddaddy like year trip away to like 5 different continents.
Sure.
There's a lot, like 3 months across Europe is awesome and
Yes.
such a good break. And I think a really good chunk of time for a lot of people who want to make like a big shift in their life, but don't necessarily want to like leave the entire old career behind, which I think is kind of a cost that you can have if you take a whole year away, depending on like what job you're in.
And I also think it's important to state too that there are all different kinds of travelers as far as pace goes.
Yes.
Like speaking on terms of pace, like slowing down your travels significantly lowers the cost.
Way, yes.
And we are not slow travelers, and that is also a thing that I think we recognize and we are aware of. We're ABM, we'll always be moving.
Yep.
But pace also matters, I think, in this budget.
Yeah. By the way, if you want to see all these spreadsheets and like poke through them yourselves, you just got to go to lisaandjosh.com, our website, and we're going to put the link down in the description. And there's the travel budget planner in there. Just like go there and download it, and you can page through all these numbers.
Play
yourself.
around with it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can see what we're talking about. But I think knowing, okay, so 3 months somewhere with me and somebody else is going to cost about $6,000.
Somebody else.
No, like with
What?
I'm talking as the viewer. With
You said me
so
and pointed to yourself.
to what
Rude.
you know what I'm saying, and then so cost between $5,000 or $6,000 per person
Yep.
to be able to do a trip like that. And then two people going on this massive 1-year thing is going to cost about $24,000 per
Mhm.
person. And then scaling that back even a little bit of just doing 1 month. Let's say that all you wanted to do was take off 1 month and go to Europe. That's about $3,500 to $4,500, depending on which countries you go to, for just one person. And then if you scale it up to two people, it's like 7,000. And then Southeast Asia, it's a little bit less expensive than that, but you end up paying more in flights. So it ends up to be just about the
Depending
same.
on where you're coming from.
And I think those numbers are a lot more realistic for a lot of people to get into, to try this out, because honestly, you might get 3 months into a trip and be like, that's enough traveling for me for like, I feel like, whoo, did a lot. Been changing cities every like 4 or 5 days for the past 3 months, and I'm a little tired. Maybe it's time to go back home. And I think that's like a perfect taster trip to just pick like a continent and just do whatever you're interested in that continent for like a handful of months as your first trip.
Well, and I think most importantly, that number is just way more digestible. That
Yeah.
number is way more digestible than thinking about traveling for 3 months somewhere or 5 months somewhere, or a whole year somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's certainly more digestible than a $40,000 trip.
And I think that one of the big reasons that we were comfortable with saving up for like the big $40,000 that we ended up doing was because I think we both knew what sacrifices were required. We both knew what it was going to take, how much we were going to have to cut back about everything, and that was comfortable for us because we're
Well,
both just kind of budget focused.
But I think to backtrack a little bit, one thing that was really helpful to also make this number more digestible and the quest more feel like something that I could actually attain
Mhm.
was us regularly checking in on our budget normally,
Oh,
like
right.
our life budget. And, I think this is, we don't want to get too much into the finance part of life, like outside of travel, but I do think something that helps me personally when making big purchases or even going on trips like this is we regularly check in and look at all of our accounts, see how much we're spending every month,
Yep.
what we're spending a lot on, what we're not spending a lot on, rent, all of that, gas, all of that, and seeing that number in comparison to this helped a lot, because when we were living in the Bay Area at the time, working our 9 to 5s, we were spending $4,000
Yeah,
sometimes a
easily,
month.
4 or 5,000. It's just so expensive to live there.
Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of you out there live in expensive places, and even at the cheapest places in the U.S.,
It's
you're still spending a couple of grand a month,
so then when
no
I
matter what.
compare that $4,000 a month to, $40,000 divided by 12, that's
Mhm.
like $3,000 to $4,000, like $3,000.
Yeah,
I think, oh, okay, I know what that's like then.
yeah.
I know what to compare it to.
Traveling the world full time is for sure cheaper than living at home in a lot of places in the United States.
For us, it was for sure. And that was a surprising realization.
Yes. Okay, so that's the numbers for like moving super fast, going like 4 or 5 days into every single place, bop, 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 jumping around. Now, if you slow down, like what Lisa was talking about before, if you slow down and you spend maybe like 2 weeks per place and you end up going to, let's say, half as many places or 1/3 as many places, you end up reducing this flight cost by a huge amount.
Mhm.
And then your overall trip for two people goes down to about $28,000 instead of $47,000. If you just slow down and you rent Airbnbs for a longer period of time that are cheaper,
Yeah.
that cost reduces substantially.
Mhm.
The thing that we wanted to do was do like a sampler platter
We just wanted to
of
see
the
everything.
whole world, and we were like kind of FOMO, just driving us to go and
Yeah.
like see, but we're gonna spend 4 days there, and then we're gonna quick run over there, and then we're gonna go to Seoul, and then we might as well fly from Seoul all the
It's
way
that
to Europe. Yeah.
fear/excitement that we were
Yes.
talking about last week, that fear of missing out and the fear of like,
Yeah.
what if we can't go to these places?
Mm.
But I think to each their own.
To each their own. Yes. So just know that if you out there are more interested in slower travel, which
Mhm.
is generally not the type of travel that we do, that is like way cheaper, like 40% cheaper than doing it this fast way than what we had
This
prescribed
is
before.
a good point for us to also write down. We should reach out to our friends who slow travel
Oh yeah.
and our friends who specifically the YouTube travel sphere. It's kind of fun. You kind of know in the same way that you guys have probably heard of a lot of the same travel YouTubers that traveling in different areas at the same time. I'd be curious to hear from the travelers who are living in a place like we on this trip. We did stay in Thailand for a month, and that was the longest place that we had ever stayed somewhere.
Hmm.
We saved a bunch of money by just getting a, an apartment for a month and traveling around from there. Um, but we know people who have moved to Thailand for like a year. This is just a note for us. And also, viewers out there and listeners out there, tell us if this is something you're interested in. If you'd like to hear from other kinds of travelers that aren't the ABM like us.
Always be moving. Yeah, I mean, just to give you an example, that 1 month in Chiang Mai, food,
Hmm.
transportation, motorbike, everything all included was just under $1,000. It
Wow.
was $950 for that whole thing,
Wow.
which is which is crazy. So if you can imagine like that sort of lifestyle where you're hunkering down in cheaper
Hmm.
locations for long periods of time, you really can travel for a super long period of time without spending that much money.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different ways to do these trips, and we are eventually going to go through every single one of them in detail of how we would think about it.
And maybe we'll bring on some experts.
We definitely will. Okay, so at this point in our story, right, like we had this number, this goal of we need to get about $35,000, so
Hmm.
$40,000. Okay, how the heck do you do that? And that's what we're going to be talking about in the next episode is exactly all of the lifestyle changes that we had to make to go from honestly like the way that we were living where we weren't saving anything on your average month to where 2 months later we were saving about 70% of all the money that was coming in and shoving that directly towards this gigantic dream that we were trying to make come true. And there were a lot of changes that we had to make.
And some of those changes may or may not include $5 rotisserie chickens.
Oh man,
But I digress.
we're going to talk about Costco chicken so much. All right, that is it for this podcast. We'll see you
You
guys next time.
think.
Bye.
New shirt.